He neutralizes toxic atmosphere. Her settlement offers their princess. As payment, blaring sirens jolted Mason Hale awake as his survey shuttle, battered and aflame, plummeted through the corrosive skies of Vera 4. Crimson hazard lights flashed in the cramped cockpit, the ship's AI reporting in a detached monotone. Structural integrity compromised, oxygen reserves critical, atmospheric toxicity at fatal levels for human biology. Mason's heart pounded as adrenaline surged. His fingers raced over the cracked control panels, ignoring the static that fizzed across the displays. He jerked the manual override, fighting with every ounce of training and desperation to keep the vessel from spinning into a death spiral. The hull shrieked, a banshee wail that vibrated through his bones. The acidic clouds outside, swirling ochre and sickly green, hammered at the failing shields, sending rivers of caustic rain splattering against the viewport. Mason coughed, tasting acrid smoke and fear. The ground rushed up, jagged alien hills blurred by venomous mist. He braced for impact. A thunderous crash snapped the world sideways. Mason bit down hard, agony lancing through his jaw as he tasted blood. The harness snapped, and he was flung forward, smashing into the instrument panel. A shard of metal tore into his side, heat and pain blooming together as hot blood spattered across the fractured display, dripping down to hiss against the smoking floor. Then, stillness. Smoke billowed in the ruined cockpit. Distant alarms pulsed, growing weaker. Mason forced his eyes open, lungs heaving. The ship was half buried, a gash torn deep into the hillside, hull buckled and sparking. He groaned, pushing himself upright, the taste of iron and smoke thick on his tongue. He pressed a shaking hand to his side, felt the wet warmth of blood seeping through his suit. Venomous mist curled through the shattered hull, clouds deadly to humans, the AI's warnings echoing in his memory. Mason braced for the burning in his lungs, the tightening of his throat. Instead, the air shimmered strangely where his blood had pooled on the metal, the toxic vapor receding, leaving bubbles of clarity. He stared, wide-eyed, as the clean air spread, the poison driven back by some invisible force. He drew in a shaky breath, steady, sweetly breathable. "What in the world?" he murmured, voice hoarse with awe and disbelief. He wiped blood from his chin, watched as a new pocket of pure air formed in its wake. Movement flickered in the haze beyond the torn hull. Shadows resolved into tall, sleek forms, humanoid, but with an alien grace. The Falari. Mason had seen their images in data files, but nothing had prepared him for their presence in the flesh. They moved with wary purpose, armored suits gleaming in the greenish light, weapons ready, but held low. The foremost figure stepped through the threshold of his strange protective bubble. She was taller than Mason, her armor etched with intricate silver patterns, helmet reflecting the broken light. There was something magnetic in her bearing, a coiled power even in stillness. Her voice, resonant and steady through the helmet speaker, carried the weight of command. "By the laws of the ancients you have brought life to this blighted ground. Name yourself Starfarer, that we may know the one whose blood works wonders." Mason forced himself to his feet, swaying as he wiped more blood from his chin. Again, the mist retreated, clarity blooming in its place. He met her gaze behind the visor, saw golden eyes burning through the dim glass. "Mason Hale," he managed, voice thick with pain and confusion. "I have no idea how I'm doing this." She regarded him a moment longer, then signaled to her companions. "He lives," she called, her tone making it clear she expected him to continue doing so. With careful efficiency, they moved Mason out of the wreckage, fitting a sterile bandage over his side as they escorted him from the dying shuttle. The journey took them through winding tunnels aglow with bioluminescent patterns. The walls pulsed with shifting blues and violets, illuminating the faces of the Falari who watched with open fascination. Mason's escort stayed close, her stride long and effortless. When they finally removed their suits in a sealed antechamber, Mason caught his breath at the sight of her unveiled form. A mane of fiery, fur-like hair tumbled over her shoulders, and sharp, feline ears crowned her head. Her golden eyes seemed to pierce through him, and her slender, powerful frame was encased in intricate black armor that clung to every motion. "Our scientists are astounded by your blood," she said as they walked. "The air above your crash site remains clear even now, hours later." Mason flexed his freshly bandaged arm, searching her face for any hint of a trick. "I'm just a xenobiologist, not a miracle worker. If there's an explanation, I don't have it." She tilted her head, curiosity burning in her gaze. "You are more than you appear, Mason Hale." He followed her through a towering archway, the doors sliding open with a deep, resonant chime. The chamber beyond was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, columns rising like petrified trees. At the far end sat the Falari Council, 6 elders robed in flowing silver and black. Their leader, Elder Serene, had skin like polished obsidian and eyes that gleamed with ancient sorrow. "For generations, we have dwelled in darkness as our world withers above. Your blood brings hope." Elder Saren's voice carried across the chamber, echoing off the carved stone. The red-haired woman stood at Mason's side, so close he could feel the heat of her body through his suit. His heart pounded in his chest. "This is Commander Lysara, our future leader," Saren continued, gesturing to her. "By our oldest law, she offers herself as your bondmate to secure your gift." The words struck Mason like a blow. He recoiled instinctively, bristling. "Where I come from, people aren't bargaining chips," he snapped, indignation flashing in his eyes. "Where you come from, the sky is still safe," Saren replied, voice cool and implacable. "Accept the bond, prove yourself in our trials, and your children may inherit a living world." Mason turned to Lysara, searching her face. In her gaze, he saw not only duty, but a spark. Recognition, attraction, something deeper flickering between them. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. "And if I refuse?" Mason asked, voice barely above a whisper. "You remain our guest, but our people will perish while you enjoy our deepest sanctuary," Saren said, the words falling like a sentence. Mason's mind spun with possibility and peril, the weight of their hope pressing in from every side. He met Lysara's gaze once more, uncertainty and longing warring in his chest as the fate of an entire world hung in the balance. The arena carved from ancient stone thrummed with anticipation as hundreds of Falari gathered, their voices rising in a low, expectant hum that filled the sunlit bowl. Mason stood at the center of the ring, his boots sinking slightly into the gritty, golden sand. The curved blade in his hand was heavier than it looked, the grip alien beneath his fingers, its balance tuned to a warrior's touch he hadn't yet mastered. Sweat slicked his palms as he tested its weight, pulse thundering in his ears. Across the ring, his opponent waited. Talek was a giant by Falari standards, broad-shouldered and scarred, his twin blades weaving through the air in a fluid, menacing display. Ritual markings gleamed across his arms, the trophies of past victories. Talek's gaze locked on Mason, unreadable but fierce. From the council box above, Elder Saren's voice rang out clear and cold. "First trial, strength, speed, and courage. Let all gathered bear witness." Mason's eyes flicked upward. He caught Lysara's gaze through the transparent screen of the council box. She sat tall and composed, but her fists were clenched so tightly her knuckles blanched. Her lips moved in a silent word. "Breathe." And Mason felt the panic in his chest loosen, just a fraction. The drums began, deep and rhythmic, vibrating through the stone. The crowd fell silent, 1,000 eyes fixed on the two figures in the ring. Talek struck first, a blur of motion. Mason barely got his blade up in time, the clash of metal jarring through his arms. Talek pressed forward, his twin blades dancing in an elegant, deadly pattern, each strike a test, each parry a lesson. Mason retreated, his back foot scraping through sand as he fought to keep up, the world shrinking to the hiss of breath and the gleam of steel. Talek's style was almost beautiful. Each attack flowed into the next, a living choreography of force and grace. Mason stumbled, sweat stinging his eyes, every muscle screaming for more air. He blocked high, low, then caught a blade glancing off his side. A line of fire bloomed across his ribs. Blood splattered the sand, dark, shockingly vivid. Where it struck, the toxic haze that clung to the arena floor shimmered and parted, tiny bubbles of clean, shining air blossoming outward. A gasp rippled through the crowd, a chorus of awe and fear. Even Talek paused, his blades held wide, eyes riveted to the miracle at their feet. "Even here your blood calls to the land," Talek said, voice rough with wonder. "But this is a test of warriors, not miracles." Mason sucked in a steadying breath. "Then let's fight for real." He adapted, forced himself to watch not the blades, but the motion of Talek's shoulders, the way his weight shifted. The Falari style was all speed and agility, but Mason had size and raw strength. He started to use it, digging in his heels, catching Talek's momentum and turning it back on him. Their blades clashed again and again, ringing through the arena, sparks leaping from the edges. Talek overreached, just for a heartbeat, but it was enough. Mason caught his arm, twisted, and slammed his weight forward, knocking the bigger man off balance. The crowd roared as Talek crashed to one knee. Mason pressed his blade gently but firmly to Talek's throat. Talek's lips curled in a smile, respect gleaming in his eyes. "Yield," he said, voice ringing for all to hear. A thunderous cheer exploded from the stands. Talek rose, sheathing his blades, and clasped Mason's shoulder with a warrior's gratitude. "You fight with the strength of stone, Starfarer. This day, you have earned my respect." From above, Lysara's mask of composure slipped, her lips parted, her golden eyes shining with pride and something deeper, relief, maybe even joy. Mason felt the warmth of her gaze like sunlight, as if the entire arena had faded away and only the two of them remained. Elder Saren stood, her voice cutting through the cheers. "The first trial is done. The Starfarer has shown his strength." Mason let the crowd's roar wash over him, barely hearing the words, his chest heaving with exhaustion and exhilaration. For a moment, he met Lysara's eyes and felt a current run between them, a connection forged in the crucible of danger and watched by an entire civilization. Later, Mason followed Lysara down winding tunnels carved deep into the heart of the earth, each step echoing with the weight of history. The archives glowed with thousands of memory stones embedded in the walls, their surfaces alive with shifting patterns of light and shadow. Here, stories were stored not just in words, but in living images and echoes of the past. Lysara walked beside him, her presence both a comfort and a distraction. The faint scent of her, wildflowers and rain, hung in the cool air, stirring something restless inside him. She guided him through the labyrinth, her fingers trailing along the glowing walls. "The second trial is wisdom," Lysara said, her voice soft but steady. "You must solve the riddle of our dying sky." Mason tried to focus on her words, not the way her fiery hair caught the violet light, or the tilt of her head as she watched him. "You mean, you want me to find out why your atmosphere is still toxic after all these generations?" he asked, forcing his attention to the challenge. She nodded, pausing before a round chamber at the archive's heart. A pedestal rose in its center. As they entered, a hologram flickered into existence above it. Star maps, scientific notations, images of Vera 4 as it once was, lush, green, cradled in blue skies. Mason stepped closer, tracing the lines of data that spilled across the projection. "What changed?" he asked, voice low. Lysara joined him, her shoulder brushing his. "A disaster," she said quietly. "The details are lost. The records from that era are fragmented, corrupted by time and secrecy." Mason manipulated the controls, splaying data across the air. He watched as the poison that suffused Vera's atmosphere spread in branching tendrils from certain fixed points. "These aren't natural patterns," he murmured. "They're deployment sites. Someone turned your world into a wasteland, deliberately." Lysara's hand found his arm, warm through his sleeve, steadying. "The Draxel were our enemies, but we defeated them, drove them from our world in fire and blood." "Or did they leave a weapon behind?" Mason's brow furrowed as he zoomed in on one of the sites, a crater scarred with the residue of alien technology. "A device for slow extinction? Something designed to poison your world long after the war ended." Lysara's hip brushed his as she leaned closer, her focus absolute. "If you're right, the poison will not stop on its own. No matter how deep we hide, it will find us." Mason's mind raced. He pulled up the data on his blood's strange effect, how it didn't just neutralize the toxins, but reverse them, causing the air to become clear and breathable wherever it touched. He overlaid this new data atop the old, watched as the clean air spread in simulation, erasing the Draxel's lingering death. Lysara stared, eyes wide, lips parted. "You're undoing the weapon," she whispered, awe and hope blooming in her voice. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The Forbidden Vaults hold records of the last war, schematics, sealed testimonies. Can you get me in?" Her golden gaze met his, fierce and vulnerable all at once. "Not without breaking sacred vows," Mason admitted, uncertainty tightening his chest. "Your laws." She searched his face, her expression torn between duty and something more personal. "But if you're right, survival is worth more than vows." Her fingers brushed his cheek, cool and gentle, sending a jolt through him. The trial, he realized, had become more than a test of intellect. It was now a matter of trust, of shared fate. "Why help me?" Mason asked, voice barely above a breath, the question laden with hope and doubt. Lysara hesitated, then let her hand linger against his skin. "Because you see hope, where we see only endings, and—" her voice faltered, eyes shining. "Because I want to believe in tomorrow." The words hung between them, fragile as spun glass, yet carrying the weight of a world's longing. Mason felt the tremor of possibility, and the ancient stones of the archives seemed to pulse in time with his racing heart. The third trial began at dawn, the sickly glow of Vera's rising sun barely piercing the surface mists. Lethal vapors coiled through shattered streets and over the ruins of dead towers. Mason stood by the airlock, sealing the last clasp of his suit, nerves jangling as Lysara knelt at his side, double-checking the fastenings with quick, precise fingers. Her eyes, molten gold, were clouded by worry. "Your seal's imperfect here," she said softly, tugging at his forearm. "Breathe shallowly. Trust the rebreather, not the filters." Mason tried to smile. "I'm not sure trust is the word for what I feel right now." She ignored his attempt at levity, straightening and cupping his helmet in her hands. The gentle pressure of her touch was a grounding weight. "Survive 12 hours above," she reminded him, voice barely more than a whisper. "Reach the marker and return with proof. The mists will test you, Mason." He gazed at the wall display. A flickering map, a route drawn through toxin-choked streets and collapsed buildings to a distant beacon. "If my suit fails?" he asked, voice tight, her jaw set. "Then we'll see if your blood can save you." There was a fierce pride behind the fear, as if she believed in him against all odds. He wanted to say something more, to promise her survival or victory. But the airlock cycled with a warning klaxon, and the moment was gone. Lysara's hand lingered a heartbeat on his shoulder. Then she stepped back, and the hatch slid open. Mason stepped into the poison. The first sensation was weight, the atmosphere pressing in, the taste of metal even through the suit's filters. The world was gray and green, ruined towers looming like gravestones above a sea of swirling fog. Shards of glass and broken stone crunched beneath his boots as he picked his way through the outskirts of the ancient city. All around him, silence pressed close, broken only by the distant moan of wind and the soft hiss of toxic vapor against his visor. For the first hour, he moved with methodical caution, checking his bearings against the map, counting his breaths, watching for rips or malfunctions. Sweat pooled at the small of his back. He passed the skeletons of once grand plazas and empty thoroughfares, every surface scoured by years of acidic rain. Lysara's voice came through the calm at intervals, tight with anxiety. "How's your air?" "Stable so far. Filters holding." "Stay sharp. We're watching your vitals." Time stretched. Mason kept moving, muscles burning from the unfamiliar weight of the suit. At 2 hours, he reached a shattered bridge, blackened beams twisted over a dry canal, the surface below thick with chemical residue. He climbed over, pausing to scan the horizon. The marker beacon pulsed, a faint blue light half swallowed by mist, still kilometers away. He pressed on. 3 kilometers out, his scanner pinged. The air shimmered strangely here, a subtle pulsing in the haze. The ground was pitted and blackened, riddled with metallic debris, alien, unmistakably Draxil. He approached warily, recognizing the signs from ancient records. The deployment site pulsed with foul energy, conduits snaking out from a central core like the roots of a poisoned tree. Every step set off new alarms on his wrist display. His gloved hand brushed a jagged edge. The suit caught, and a thin tear opened along his thigh. He hissed, feeling the sting as blood seeped through. Immediately, the vapor near his leg thinned and parted, a pocket of fresh, breathable air forming around him. The scanner's red warnings flickered to green in a tiny radius. Mason knelt beside the core, recording every detail. "Alien structure, active," he narrated for the council. "Central processor, still cycling, conduits leading east, south, and west. Matrix networked, likely controls atmospheric distribution." He circled the main housing, documenting markings and interfaces, fingers trembling as he realized the scale of what he'd found. The poison wasn't a byproduct. It was intentional. A slow, precise act of planetary murder. He pressed his palm to the metal, letting more blood seep through the suit. The matrix absorbed it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground trembled. The humming rose to a fever pitch. The fog around the site recoiled, a wave of clarity sweeping outward. Mason staggered back as the mists broke, sunlight striking the ground for the first time in decades. At his feet, the blackened earth cracked, and the impossible happened. Tiny green shoots pierced the soil, trembling in the new light. "Incredible," Mason breathed, his voice shaky with awe. "Lysara, are you seeing this?" Static crackled, then her voice burst through, urgent and high with disbelief. "Massive atmospheric shifts. Sensors are off the scale. What's happening?" "I found the device. I know how to end this," Mason replied, eyes locked on the growing patches of life. "Return with proof," Lysara urged, a quaver in her words. Mason stood for a moment, transfixed by the sight. The poison was receding, the world breathing again. The proof was everywhere. "I'm bringing something better," he said, gently cradling a handful of fragile green shoots in his palm before tucking them in a sample vial. He took one last panoramic scan and turned back toward the city. The trek home was different. The air shifted around him, pockets of clarity trailing where his blood had touched the ground. But he was exhausted, every step heavier, every breath a little more desperate as the suit's oxygen alarms began to chime. The city's silhouette emerged from the haze, the council tower rising like a beacon, and Mason quickened his pace, hope and adrenaline warring with fatigue. He was less than 100 meters from the airlock when figures appeared through the mist, half a dozen Falari in black armor, weapons raised and faces masked. Their insignia gleamed. The Preservation Circle, a shadowy faction he'd only heard of in passing. Their leader stepped forward, broad-shouldered and cold-eyed, a scar twisting his jaw. "I am Myleek," he announced, voice flat, "speaker for the Preservation Circle. You will come with us, Starfarer." Mason stopped short, chest heaving. "I need to see Elder Saren. I've discovered—" Myleek's mouth curved in a chill smile. "You've found exactly what we hoped. The weapon. Your blood's power. Knowledge for trade." Mason's mind whirled. "Trade with whom?" he demanded, rage and dread knotting in his gut. Myleek's answer was ice. "The Consortium, the Alliance, the Syndicate, whoever pays most for your gift. You are our asset now." A deeper realization struck Mason. The Preservation Circle had waited for this, waited for him to succeed, to prove the impossible, and now they would use him, not to save Vera, but to bargain for power among the stars. Before he could answer, Lysara appeared, striding from the mist with a fury that crackled like lightning. Her armor was battered, her hair wild, eyes burning. "Myleek, this is madness!" she spat, moving to block Mason's captors. Myleek didn't flinch. "The Circle has authority now. You are our asset." He turned to his soldiers. "Secure him." As hands reached for Mason, he glanced at Lysara, desperation and trust in his eyes. She met his gaze, defiance blazing, and for a split second, Mason knew neither the Preservation Circle nor the poison would have the final say. Mason paced the length of his confinement, a suite furnished with silk cushions and ancient Falari tapestries, all meant to dazzle and distract, not to comfort. He pressed his palm against the glass doors for what felt like the 100th time, testing the lock. No give. He moved to the panel by the wall, nothing but a blinking red light. The luxury only heightened the sense of imprisonment, each artifact a reminder that he was an asset, not a guest. He was staring at his own reflection in the darkened glass when footsteps echoed in the corridor. Mason tensed, moving quickly away from the door. The electronic lock clicked, disengaging with a quiet whine. The door slid open, and a Falari guard slipped inside, visor down. Mason's pulse jumped, but the guard lifted her helmet, revealing a cascade of fiery hair, feline ears twitching in agitation. Lysara. She closed the door behind her, fingers trembling as she fastened the lock again from the inside. Her uniform was too large at the shoulders, a blaster slung awkwardly at her hip. Her golden eyes searched the room before settling on him, worry written in every line of her face. "How did you get in?" Mason whispered, crossing to her in 2 quick strides. She exhaled, her voice pitched low. "My cousin Rin helped. Family still matters here, even when the law doesn't." She threw a wary glance at the security panel, then stalked the length of the suite, boots muffled by thick carpets. Her fists clenched and unclenched, shoulders rigid with tension. "Serena's arguing with the Circle, trying to block Myleek," Lysara continued, pacing. "But the law's on their side now. Myleek thinks if he sells you, he can buy safety for Vera. for himself. Mason watched her, heart pounding, searching her face for some anchor in the chaos. "What does this mean to you?" he asked quietly, the words catching between them. She stopped, caught off guard. For a moment, vulnerability flickered in her eyes, gold and uncertain, like sunlight through smoke. "You're not just a solution, Mason. You're the first to look at us and see hope, not profit, not strategy." He stepped closer, reaching up to touch her cheek. His hand was gentle, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I see more than hope," he said softly, letting the words linger, hanging between them like a promise. Her breath hitched. For a heartbeat, she leaned into his touch, eyes closing. "This complicates everything," she whispered. "It already is complicated," he murmured, voice rough with feeling. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze head-on. The bondmate offer was tradition, duty. My feelings weren't supposed to matter. She swallowed, voice trembling. "And now?" He brushed his thumb along her cheekbone, slow and deliberate. "And now?" Lysara looked away, blinking back tears. "Now I wish we'd met as equals, where I could choose, not just obey a law older than both our peoples." Her words were barely audible, but her meaning rang clear. Mason tipped her face back toward him, studying every freckle, every shadow. "What would you choose?" he asked. Her lips trembled into a fragile smile. "To help you save my world, to stand with you, and—" She hesitated, voice raw. "To give you my heart, because you've earned it." She pressed trembling fingers to his lips, silencing his reply. "But I am bound by duty. The law still rules us." Mason kissed her fingertips, tasting the salt of her tears. "Then help me change that. Help me finish this. Not as their asset, but as myself." She stepped into his arms, her armor cold against his body, her presence burning. For a moment, neither spoke. The city's distant noise, the threat of the circle, the fate of Vera, all faded, replaced by the gravity of this small, stolen moment. Finally, Lysara pulled away, wiping her cheeks. "Malik's security is tight. They're monitoring every call, every door, every corridor." Mason nodded, mind racing. "I don't need to call anyone. I need to reach the other weapon sites. My blood can counteract the poison, but there are so many." Lysara stepped close, so close he could see the flicker of resolve in her eyes. "There are 16 more deployment sites. Even if you moved nonstop, it would take weeks to reach them all. Malik will catch us long before then." Mason's mind whirled, searching for a solution. "Unless—" He paused, grabbing her hands. "Unless we hit the central hub, the control point. If I can destroy it, the whole network shuts down at once." Lysara drew back, face paling. "The Forbidden City. The ancient heart." She shook her head. "No one's been there in centuries. It's more than ruins. Our best suits fail in minutes. The air is like acid. The ground, cursed." "My blood can handle it," Mason said. "We've seen what it does. If I can get to the core, I can end this for good." He held her gaze, voice steady. "Do you trust me?" She studied him, uncertainty and hope flickering across her face. After a long moment, she nodded. "Rin can get us out. There's an old passage. Malik doesn't know it exists." She hesitated. "But once we move, the circle will hunt us. We'll be fugitives. Are you ready?" Mason moved closer, every muscle thrumming with fear and certainty. "Are you?" Instead of answering, Lysara pulled him into a fierce, desperate kiss, her hands threading through his hair, her body pressed against him with all the longing and defiance she'd kept hidden. When she finally broke away, her eyes shone with love and fear and unspoken promises. "For you, for our world," she whispered, voice shaking. "I will risk everything." In the maintenance tunnels, shadows flickered as Rin led the way, his footsteps echoing in the maze of twisting stone corridors. Mason followed close, Lysara at his side, her face tight with determination beneath her helmet's visor. Pipes dripped overhead, and the air was laced with the faint tang of ancient chemicals and distant decay. Their hurried breaths mingled with the hum of distant machinery and the sharper click of sensors sweeping the gloom. "Surface access ahead," Rin whispered, pausing at a bend to check his scanner. "But patrols are closing in fast." Mason checked the charge on his alien sidearm, the unfamiliar weapon warm in his palm. He glanced at Rin, voice urgent but calm. "How many are we facing?" Rin's lips pressed into a thin line. "A dozen. Maybe more. Malik's leading them." Lysara's hand hovered near her weapon. "He knows we're heading for the Forbidden City. He'll stop at nothing." Rin scanned the walls, searching for alternatives. "There's another route. Old tunnels from the days before the poisoning. Hardly used. Thick with contamination." He looked at Mason, doubt shadowing his eyes. Mason flexed his gloved fingers, feeling the ache in his healing palm. "My blood should shield us. If we hurry, we can make it." They backtracked, ducking through a rusted grate and into a rough-hewn passage that sloped downward, the walls etched with sky glyphs faded by time. Every step stirred up dust that glowed faintly toxic in the beams of their lamps. A sensor clicked, warning of deadly concentrations ahead. Mason drew a knife and sliced a shallow line across his palm, wincing as blood welled up. He pressed a strip of cloth to the wound, then lifted it to the air. Where the blood misted out, pockets of clarity blossomed in the vapor, growing and merging to form a narrow path through the choking haze. Lysara pressed closer, awe in her whisper. "It's working." Behind them, the sound of boots on stone echoed. Too close, too many. "Move!" Mason hissed, urgency crackling through him. They ran, Mason's bleeding hand carving a wavering corridor of clean air through the fog. The poison swirled and parted, but the effort left him lightheaded, sweat stinging his eyes beneath the mask. He heard Lysara's breathing, fast and fierce, and Rin's muttered curses as they dodged rubble and ducked beneath sagging archways. A flicker of pale light appeared ahead, moonlight filtering through a cracked ceremonial portal. Rin pointed. "That's the exit. Go!" Mason boosted Lysara up, her armored form twisting through the gap with practiced ease. Rin followed, scrambling with Mason's help. Mason braced, muscles burning, and hauled himself up last, scraping his shoulder but ignoring the pain. They emerged into a nightmare. The Forbidden City sprawled before them, its towers warped and melted by centuries of poison. The streets were twisted, blackened skeletons of a once glorious civilization. A thick blanket of miasma clung to every surface, and the air shimmered with a sickly green glow. Above it all, the central palace loomed, crowned with the sinister spire of the Draxel weapon, pulsing with toxic light. Lysara scanned the horizon, her voice tense. "The command center is deep inside, 10 kilometers, maybe more, through the deadliest zone. Our suits might last a few hours at best." Mason squeezed her hand, feeling the tremor in her grip. "We'll make it." Energy bolts sizzled behind them, scattering sparks against the stone. Malik's troops had found their trail, the whine of their weapons echoing in the poisoned air. "They'll follow us," Lysara warned, pulling Mason behind a shattered column as a bolt blasted a crater where he'd just stood. Mason's eyes narrowed. "Let them. By the time they catch up, it won't matter." They ran. Mason's blood left a trail of safety behind them, the poison retreating just long enough for Lysara and Rin to follow. Every few meters, Mason reopened the wound, painting the path with his life's currency. The city seemed to warp and shudder around them, architecture bending in unnatural curves, statues half consumed by alien growths, Shadows danced behind every shattered window. Lysara caught Mason's hand, breath ragged. Whatever happens, I choose this. I choose you. He squeezed back, their gloved fingers locking. Together. The palace complex rose before them, a monstrous silhouette against the sickly sky. Ancient gates hung twisted and broken, and the air here was thick enough to chew. Mason could feel his suit's seals degrading, but his blood's influence carved out a narrow bubble as they pressed through the entrance hall. The spire of the palace climbed overhead, crowned with the Draxel weapon, an abomination of black metal and living tissue, veins of green light pulsing up its sides. Lysara led them to a collapsed archway, peering down into the darkness beyond. The hub's beneath the palace, but the tunnels are caved in. No way through from below. Mason studied the structure, eyes narrowing as he traced the lines of the weapon, watching how conduits ran up into the spire and out across the city. The weapon must link to the network up top. If we get to the summit, I can break the connection. We climb. Rin's face twisted in alarm. The contamination spikes the higher you go. Our suits will fail. And if Malik's troops catch us, we don't have a choice, Mason said, jaw set. If we fail, there's no world left to save. Blaster fire tore through the entryway, burning holes in the ancient stone. Soldiers poured into the plaza, Malik at their head, voice roaring orders. Rin fired back, buying precious seconds. Now! Lysara shouted. They sprinted through the inner palace, Mason's blood-dissolving seals that had held for generations. They passed through crumbling ballrooms overtaken by writhing alien roots and the skeletal remains of Falari nobles, their ceremonial armor fusing with grotesque Draxil growths. The stench of old death and new corruption was suffocating, but Mason pushed on, focusing on Lysara's hand in his. At the palace's core, a gaping shaft yawned upward, an ancient elevator, its walls etched with warnings. Mason pulled the controls and the battered car shuddered to life. "Hurry!" Rin shouted as Malik's troops burst through the door. Mason, Lysara, and Rin dove inside just as energy bolts slammed into the closing gates. The elevator climbed, ancient motors groaning, contamination alarms shrieking in their helmets. Green mist poured through cracks, stinging Mason's eyes despite his suit. He pressed his bleeding hand to a vent, forcing clean air into the car. As they neared the apex, Mason turned to Lysara and Rin, urgency in every word. "When we reach the top, stay in the elevator. Be ready to leave as soon as I'm done." Lysara shook her head, voice fierce. "No, I go with you." Mason put both hands on her shoulders, gaze steady. "I need you safe. This is what I have to do." The elevator jolted to a stop. Through the glass, the weapon platform loomed, a biomechanical monstrosity perched at the palace's crown, veins of poison pulsing toward the city below. Alien glyphs glowed on its surface, and toxic vapor coiled around it like a living thing. Lysara seized his arm, her eyes blazing. "If you die, I'll never forgive you." Mason smiled beneath his visor, pressing his forehead to hers. "Then I'll have to live." He stepped out, the fate of Vera and his heart, balanced on the edge of every breath. Mason stepped onto the weapon platform, boots ringing on metal slick with alien fluids. The command center of the Draxil device loomed above him, a tangled core pulsing with sickly green light, veins of poison snaking outward into the wounded sky. Every breath felt thin, electric, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. He approached the core. It throbbed with malignant purpose, the heart of a planetary nightmare. Mason's hands shook as he drew his blade, pressing the edge to his wrist. He hesitated only a moment, then slashed, not once but twice, letting his blood spill freely onto the exposed machinery. At first, nothing happened. Then, the core convulsed as if struck by lightning. Red and gold droplets hissed on contact, vaporizing the surface toxin. Alien circuitry sparked and died, the sickly glow retreating in jagged waves. Mason staggered, bracing himself against the trembling rail as the weapon shuddered. His blood, flowing onto the conduits and processor nodes, began to eat away the centuries-old infection. The poison receded as islands of fresh air expanded around him, pushing out in rippling bubbles. Across the ruined city, towers blinked and dimmed. Network lights guttered and failed. The weapon's song, a pulse Mason had felt since entering the spire, faltered, then shattered into silence. The shriek of dying machinery echoed up through the structure, a banshee wail fading to nothing. He swayed, knees buckling, vision tunneling at the edges. Somewhere far below, Milik's forces were still climbing, but they would be too late. The device was dying, the network unraveling in a domino of failure. Mason looked out over the city, watched black fog swirl and break apart, letting golden sunlight pierce through for the first time in centuries. The elevator whined, returning to the platform. Through the glass, Lysara's face appeared, panicked, determined, defiant. Rin stood at her side, overriding the controls. "Mason, get out!" Lysara shouted, voice barely audible through the barrier. "The structure's collapsing." The entire spire shook, cracks spiderwebbing through the floor. Alien fluids hissed and boiled as they met the clean air, spilling into the abyss below. Mason could barely keep his feet, the world listing sideways as the platform heaved. He fumbled toward the elevator, arms streaked with blood, suit torn. Rin's voice crackled in his helmet, awestruck. "Contamination dropping everywhere. It's happening, Mason. It's really happening." The doors slid open. Lysara caught him as he stumbled forward, her arms strong and grounding. For a moment he collapsed against her, everything spinning. Her breath was ragged, and he could feel her heart pounding. "You did it," she whispered fiercely, holding him tight as the structure groaned around them. "It's over." The elevator dropped, plunging down the shaft as explosions tore through the palace above. They clung to the railings as the car vibrated and shuddered, then finally settled with a crash in the plaza below. Outside, chaos reigned. Malik's soldiers stood frozen, weapons forgotten, their faces turned upward in shock as the poisonous sky dissolved into ribbons of blue. Sunlight spilled over the square, dazzling and new. Rin yanked the doors open, and clean air rushed in. Malik's men staggered, awestruck, some kneeling as if in prayer. Their mission, their fears, everything they'd been taught, shattered by the miracle unfolding above. Lysara ignored them, focusing on Mason. She stripped his helmet off with shaking hands, then tore off her own, not caring that the soldiers watched. She pressed her forehead to his, her tears hot on his cheek. "Stay with me, Mason. Please." Her voice broke, desperate and raw. He tried to smile, lips cracked and pale. "I'm here, Lysara. I'm not going anywhere." His words were slurred, but the air around him was clear and sweet, every breath easier than the last. Rin was already calling for medics. "Healers! Now! Bring the kit! He's losing too much blood." Within minutes, Falari healers arrived, their white robes stained in their haste. They worked in silence and awe, sealing Mason's wounds with advanced field tech and ancient salves. Someone pressed a mask to his face, flooding his lungs with oxygen, but he kept his eyes on Lysara, her fingers never leaving his. Malik approached, his armor scorched, weapon lowered, arrogance washed away by shock and humility. He stared at Mason, voice hollow. "You destroyed it. The weapon is gone." Lysara rose, stepping between Malik and Mason, her stance protective, fierce. "He did. He gave us our world back. Remember that." Malik looked away, crushed, as the council's banners unfurled above the square. Saren and the elders restored to their place, the crowd erupting in cheers and tears as the air grew sweeter with every moment. Days passed. Mason drifted in and out of sleep, feverish dreams chased away by the gentle touch of healers and the reassuring presence of Lysara by his side. When he finally awoke, the world had changed. He lay in a sunlit chamber, the walls painted with patterns of blue sky and wild flowers. The air was crisp and clean, fragrant with the promise of renewal. Mason blinked, confusion fading as he focused on the woman beside him. Lysara was curled on the edge of his bed, her fiery hair spilling over the pillow, her hand woven through his. He turned his head, throat dry. The air. Lysara sat up, her smile radiant, tears of joy streaking her cheeks. It's clean, Mason. For the first time in centuries, our children will see the sky. He flexed his fingers, feeling strength return. The council? He asked, worry flickering in his eyes. She brushed her lips against his knuckles, voice steady. Saren is restored. Milik is being judged for his crimes. The old laws remain, but now they bind us in gratitude, not fear. Mason's voice was quiet, but sure. And you? Lysara leaned close, eyes shining with love and pride. Now, the choice is ours. And my heart, Starfarer, chooses you. She kissed him, soft and sure, and he felt the weight of a world lift from his shoulders. Outside, the last wisps of poison faded into blue, sunlight streaming through open windows. Mason and Lysara held each other as a new world unfolded, one they had saved together, one they could finally call home. That's the end of the story. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, like the video, and write in the comments what you liked most about this story. Our team will be very grateful to you. You can find even more fascinating stories on our channel. See you in the next video.